air raids are sounding in Tel Aviv and in central Israel. That's live pictures coming into us. And in the last 24 hours, Hamas has fired a barrage of rockets at Israel, and Israel has responded with aerial strikes. We're just receiving word that flights in and out of Ben Gurion International in Tel Aviv have been halted amidst that rocket fire from Gaza. Well, on the Palestinian side, 10 children are reported to be amongst the at least 28 people killed in the Gaza Strip, whilst in Israel, 2 women have been killed in rocket strikes in the coastal city of Ashkelon, which is just north of Gaza. Well, tensions that have been simmering for weeks, but violence erupted last Friday when Israeli riot police clashed with crowds at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. And since then, there have been nightly clashes. France 24's Sharon Gaffney has the latest for us.
A young girl watches on as the body of her 11-year-old cousin is carried by relatives. Hussein Hamad was one of several Palestinian children killed in Israeli airstrikes on Monday.
وليش قتلوه يعني؟ ما هم بقتلوا فيش حساب لهم، ما هم بقتلوا فيش حساب، العالم كله بتفرج، ولو قتل طفل، لو قتل مرة، لو قتل إيش ما جاء، فيش واحد يحاسبهم هذول الناس. فعشان هيك هو متاح له، يعني لو قتل طفل ولا حاجة عنده.
Israel said the airstrikes hit 130 targets, killing at least 15 members of the militant groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad, including senior commanders. There were also fatalities in Israel after hundreds of rockets were launched by militants in Gaza. At least 2 women were killed at an apartment block in the southern city of Ashkelon.
ושמעתי בום חזק, אבל לא כל כך חזק, לא הייתי מאמין שבבניין שלנו נפלה הפצצה הזאת.
After warning that a red line had been crossed, the Israeli Prime Minister says strikes on Gaza will be stepped up.
הסיכום של הישיבה הוא להגביר עוד יותר גם את עוצמת התקיפות וגם את קצב התקיפות. החמאס יקבל כאן מכות שהוא לא ציפה להן.
Tensions have been high in Jerusalem during the month of Ramadan and in the wake of controversial efforts in the Israeli courts to evict Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem. The latest violence followed hours of clashes between Palestinians and Israeli security forces, including confrontations at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. The EU and United States have appealed for calm, while Egypt, Qatar and the United Nations are attempting to intervene to stem the spiralling violence.
And we're just hearing that 1 person has been critically wounded by rocket attacks in the Tel Aviv area. That's according to health officials in Israel. Well, for more, we can cross to London and speak to Ian Black, who is the author of Enemies and Neighbours, Arabs and Jews in Palestine and Israel. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Now, there's been brewing anger for several days over threatened evictions of Palestinian families in occupied East Jerusalem. There's been the heavy-handed policing at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hamas issued an ultimatum for those matters to be addressed, and they weren't. So is it fair to say this whole escalation could have been avoided?
Well, maybe, but the status quo has gone on for over 53 years, and the international community has, in recent times, ignored the most intractable conflict on earth, I think. Donald Trump was very pro-Israeli, and in his 4 years in office, was treating Benjamin Netanyahu as a close ally. And I think that the Palestinians feel mounting frustration about their situation, living as they see it under occupation by a foreign power. So that's the mixture of circumstances which have led to this latest outbreak.
Yeah, interesting to see that Jerusalem very much at the heart of this latest escalation.
Well, of course, Jerusalem is holy both to Muslims and Jews, and it's always been a tinderbox, if you like, and always waiting to catch fire. But the fundamental issue, I think, is the lack of hope, the fading hope, if you prefer that, in a two-state solution to the conflict, which in my view is the only realistic solution to achieve that can be achieved, if you like. In recent years, Israeli settlement activity has increased both in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. So the East Jerusalem aspect of this latest escalation is very revealing in terms of the asymmetry, if you like, of the conflict. Israelis have the legal right to go to court over property in East Jerusalem, but the Palestinians don't have that right at all. So that's the factor, if you like, that has contributed, plus the escalation during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan to this latest crisis.
And I just want to ask you, I mean, what impact is the current political instability on both sides having, would you say, with regards to this escalation?
Well, on the Israeli side, elections were held the fourth in less than 2 years in March of this year, and they still haven't formed a government. All Israeli governments are coalitions, and Netanyahu has failed in his attempt to put together a coalition. The task has been devolved to Yair Lapid, who is a centrist politician. So on both sides, there is political uncertainty. And just the other day, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, cancelled or postponed elections which were due to take place later this month. So political uncertainty exists on both sides of this conflict.
Indeed, the US obviously looking on with alarm. We're just hearing now the US State Department saying it's deeply concerned about this escalation between Israel and those launching rockets from Gaza. I mean, Antony Blinken said just a short while ago, all sides need to de-escalate. This is a big test, isn't it, for the Biden administration?
Absolutely. I mean, the Biden administration has pledged, both the president himself and his Secretary of State, Blinken, to do more to resolve this crisis. But in real terms, they don't appear to have gone beyond undoing the damage done by President Trump. So, for example, the Biden administration wants to improve relations with the Palestinians. But if there isn't pressure on the Israeli side, that's not going to happen. The US remains committed to the concept of a two-state solution, but doesn't appear to do anything about to pressure Israel and the Israeli government in particular on that issue, if you like. So it's hard to be optimistic, and it's very frightening because in the last Gaza war, more than 1,200 people were killed. And it may be that this is going to escalate further and last for a long time, given the global distractions of the pandemic and Biden's wish to return to the Iranian nuclear deal, for example, which has preoccupied the United States and European powers for a very long time. But they can't ignore this most explosive conflict and the implications it may have for the Middle East as a whole.
Okay, well, Ian Black, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us and for speaking to France at 24. Just to remind our viewers, sirens are wailing in Tel Aviv. The airport, Ben Gurion International, has been closed as a precaution amidst a barrage of rocket fire coming, it is assumed, from Gaza. Well, let's get some more analysis from our international affairs editor, Armin Georgian, who's here with me in the studio. Armin, why don't we begin by just looking at the circumstances that surrounded this latest escalation? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think there's some long-term trends and some more recent political developments. So bear in mind that there haven't been any direct high-level talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians since April 2014. So that's 7 years of no direct talks at the top level, 7 years in which these underlying issues were left to fester, including the status of Jerusalem, of course. And then you've got the more recent political situations on both sides of the equation. So on the Israeli side, there's been this extraordinary 2 years of great volatility of 4 elections. Israel, of course, is no stranger to elections that sort of produce inconclusive results, and there has to be a lot of haggling to form a coalition. But one can't remember a time when there were 4 elections in 2 years with this total gridlock and the country seemingly unable to produce a stable coalition. We may be nearing the end of Prime Minister Netanyahu's tenure, but still the alternative coalition that is now taking shape very tentatively, that doesn't look like it's going to be anything solid either. So it seems that on the Israeli side, this volatile period in politics is set to continue. On the Palestinian side of the equation, you've got an important thing that happened at the end of April, which is the Palestinian legislative elections were postponed indefinitely. And this underscored the deep divide between the authorities in the Gaza Strip and the authorities in the West Bank. And I think now Hamas sees an opportunity to find a unifying symbol amid this disunity. That unifying symbol for Palestinians is, of course, Jerusalem. So you've got this kind of political void in a way on both sides, and when you combine that with, as I said at the beginning, the 7 years of no talks, of these things festering, the big issues, refugees, Jerusalem, final borders, all these things that were on the table in direct peace talks. None of this has been happening for years. So you put all that together and you get a situation which is ripe for an escalation. And now, Tom, as we're hearing these air raid sirens going in Tel Aviv, that this news from the last few minutes, it seems that Hamas is really trying to overwhelm the Iron Dome system and to try and get some rockets through and to show that it has this kind of long reach, that it has a long arm right into the heart of Israel. All of this, I think, makes one suppose, at least, that there's going to be potentially a much bigger escalation now.
And of course, world powers looking on with alarm. What are the various different powers saying about all of this?
Well, the countries that normally back the Palestinians have been quite vocal, as you would expect. Turkey, Iran, many members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, or OIC, countries which traditionally support the Palestinians. You've got countries like the United States and the UK that want to appear a little bit more balanced, perhaps, and so they've been calling in the UN Security Council for a mention not just of the planned eviction of Palestinian families, but also a mention of Hamas firing rockets to target Israelis. So you've got some countries that are trying to, have this sort of both-sidist narrative, if you will, that both sides have to de-escalate, that both sides have to calm tensions. But ultimately, the UN Security Council, in its meeting on Monday, I think it was, stopped short of issuing a statement because of these differences of opinion on the Security Council. The US, meanwhile, has stepped back from the role that it used to play some years ago as a sort of front rank mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conference. It doesn't really want to do that anymore, and it's pretty clear that President Biden himself, his instincts are not to intervene. Remember that President Biden was part of the Obama administration at the time of the Kerry Initiative, named after the Secretary of State at the time, John Kerry, the Kerry Initiative that was trying to get a deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That deal failed. I don't think that Joe Biden wants to be associated with another failed initiative of that kind. So I suspect the United States will only get involved if it absolutely has to. And even then, it will obviously try to coordinate with the European Union and the Middle East Quartet and other partners. As far as who can actually do anything at this point, Tom, I think we have to look at the history of flare-ups in Gaza, and Egypt obviously is a prime candidate for trying to get some kind of de-escalation going. The Egyptians have been very involved in previous conflicts in Gaza, in 2014 notably, but also during tensions in 2019 and 2020. It's reported that Egyptian intelligence officials are already trying to do something. And Qatar has also played a financial role in, for example, paying for humanitarian help, helping to pay the wages of Hamas employees, also contributing to the UN Relief and Works Agency. So Qatar has been an important financial player in all of this. The problem, I think, for both Qatar and Egypt, if they try and do something now, it's that it's a kind of Groundhog Day situation, Tom, where the outside powers, or at least Egypt and Qatar, they're kind of running after, once the conflict has already escalated, they're kind of trying to pick up the pieces at the end, either, with diplomatic moves to try and calm things down, or with financial help to try and boost Gaza's economy a tiny bit. But ultimately, they can't prevent the flare-ups from happening in the first place, and this is really the problem. The Egyptians tried in 2019. They tried to get a deal where Israel would ease economic restrictions on the Gaza Strip. In return, Hamas would stop firing missiles into southern Israel. That didn't last. So unfortunately, these outside actors, particularly Egypt, but also Qatar, I suppose, as another player, they're very hamstrung by this kind of logic of flare up, a little bit of calm, then another flare up, and they don't seem to be able to create the conditions for a longer term stability that would actually see perhaps some rewards on the investment that they've made inside the Gaza Strip.